Okay, STEAMist, in this video I'm going to show you how to do things in the TinkerCad app that are specifically for the iPad. Some of the videos you're going to see, I'm just going to let you know, are designed, well, at least when I'm doing them, I'm designing on a computer. So I'm going to show you some of the ways to manipulate things on the iPad, which will be slightly different from the computer, but everything you can do on the computer, you can do in the iPad app. So in a previous video, you were to go ahead and set up your TinkerCad app and set up your login and all that stuff. So when you open the app, it should already come up to your account. Oh, it didn't. Okay, so you're going to do students join a class. You're going to have to go back and get your class code. Which is on the PowerSchool Learning page. So you pick your period, copy that. And paste it here. And in this case, you're going to just put your nickname, which will be your graduation year, your first initial, and your last name. So the same thing that you use to sign into your Woodward email. Hopefully you'll already be signed in, but if not, that's how you do that. I'm going to go ahead and use my teacher account and sign in this way. Okay, so this is the landing page once you're signed in. And I want to show you a couple of things. First of all, if you want to go back into a design that you've already made, all you do is you tap on the design once, and then you do tinker this, and that will open up the design. And when you're done with your design, or you want to go back to that original screen, you're going to click up here on the TinkerCad icon, and that will take you back to all your designs. But for this, we're going to create a new design. So tap on Create New Design. And then let me show you some things. So in order to put stuff on the work plane, so what you're going to do is tap on the item that you want. Let's say I want a cube. I'm going to drag it onto the work plane. And then there's some things I can do. Okay, let me show you. With one finger, if I touch the work plane and drag it, I can change the camera angle. It does let me go around infinite number of degrees in rotating, which is good, but not in this way. Okay, and then there's something you're probably familiar with, which is pinch and zoom. With two fingers, I can zoom in to it like that. I can also zoom out like that. But then you may see that now when I zoom in, it kind of goes off to the side. So I can use two fingers like this, tap on the work plane and drag it to move the camera side to side or up and down. So this is panning. So tilt is with one finger on the work plane, dragging. Pan is two fingers on the work plane, dragging. And zoom is two fingers moving closer or further apart. Next, if I want to move this cube around, I can just tap on it and drag it. That's how I move my cube. Okay. And then there are ways to size it as well. When I tap on it one time, you'll see that I get a number of white squares and black squares. Okay, so if I tap on a black square, I can move it in one axis. If I tap on one of these four corner squares, white squares on the bottom, I can move it in two axes at the same time. And this square here on top, it's kind of hard to tell, but it is on top in the middle. That will change the height. Okay. And then there's other things I can do with moving. I can also use this black cone here at the top. That will allow me to raise or lower it. So when I tap on that black cone, I can pull it up off of the plane, and I can pull it down below the plane. And I want you to look at the two different numbers I have there. So right now they're the same. So I'm going to put it back to 0. When this number here is 0, it's on the plane. The other number, so let's say I move it up to 5. So now it is 5 millimeters off of the plane. Now, if you remember before it said 5 and 5. Now if I drag this up some more, this one now says 4, and this one says 9. This number down here is the absolute distance from the plane. So it is now 9 millimeters above the plane. This other number here at the top is how much I relatively moved it from its previous position. So now I moved it up 2 millimeters, and now it is 11 millimeters off of the plane. So that's that. Then there's some other movements I can do. You may see these curved arrows. There's one here at the bottom, there's one here, and it's kind of hard to see, but there's one here on the side. If I were to tap with one finger and drag it, I can then see that other arrow a little better. But notice when it is in the same plane as me, it's hard to see, or it is invisible. Okay, so if I move it this way, I can kind of see those rounded arrows. Those rounded arrows are used to rotate the object. So I'm going to tap on this one, and they're in 3 different planes. So if I do this one, I can rotate in this plane. If I do this one, I rotate in this plane. And if I do the one down here, I rotate in the work plane. Now there are some important things to remember when rotating. Students do this all the time and kind of mess up their design, and you kind of just have to start over if you do this. So listen carefully. So let's say I wanted to rotate it a certain number of degrees. Let's say I wanted to rotate this block, say 45 degrees. The easiest way to do that is to drag that arrow, that curved arrow, and I want to keep my finger inside of this blue circle. That will keep it kind of locked into a certain number of degrees. If you see over here, this is the number of degrees I've rotated it. This is the relative rotation. It is not an absolute rotation. So it's from where I started. And that's where people usually mess up. So the easiest way to do this is to keep my finger inside that circle, and it will lock to the major rotations like 23.5, 45, 67.5, 90, and then on to 180 and 360. Okay, so it's going by 23.5 degrees. If I drag outside, I can move it more smoothly, and I can change it to whatever angle I want. You'll see so if you look at the top here, it's changing by about 1 degree. Now I just tapped it again and I lost that connection. Now see what happens when I start to rotate again. So it was at about 33 degrees. Now when I start to rotate, that number, that counting starts over. Can't see it, so let me zoom out a little bit. So now when I start to rotate it, that counting starts over. So I've started, so now it says 22.5, but it's actually 33 plus 22.5, which is 55.5. But I've let go of it, and now it starts again over. So every time I do that, it's starting over like it's a new rotation. But as you can see, it is not at 0 degrees, it's off. There's going to be, unless I know exactly how much I rotated it every time, I'm not going to be able to get it back to that original setting. So if I go back here, 90 degrees, it's not right. I have to kind of play with it. And then chances are, because you're eyeballing it, it's not going to work. So if you look here carefully, it is actually not level, because you can see this side's touching, this side's not. It looks like from here that it's level, but it's a little ever so tiny bit off. So in that case, that's going to ruin my print, that's going to ruin my design. I need to, in that case, delete it and start over. So if I want to delete something, I can tap on the item that I want to delete, and I can tap this trash can up here, and that will delete it. There are a couple of zoom options over here, by the way. So if I'm kind of am zoomed in way too far and I can't really make sense of where I am, I can always tap on this home button, and the home button will take me back to a nice neutral view. Okay, so let's put in a new object. So I can get really zoomed in, working here, and I can't, it's kind of hard for me to grab the work plane because I'm really close. I can hit the home button to zoom out to the whole work plane. Also, if I wanted to zoom back in just to this thing, so let's say I have a couple of objects. Let's say I have these things. And if I wanted to get to just the cylinder, I can tap on the cylinder and then tap on this button here, which is this kind of square shape, and that means zoom to that selection. So that will zoom me in just to the orange cylinder. I can also use the plus here to go in further if I can't pinch and zoom, and I can use this to go out further. Now, let's talk about selecting. So you know when I tap on one thing, it selects it. I can also tap on a second thing and select two things at once, and that way now they move together. Or if I can do some operation to them. If I want to just select one thing though, and not three things, for example, I need to tap off of it. I need to tap here on the work plane and then tap on the object that I want to select one of, okay? Also, if I select two things, I can zoom into those two things because this is zoom to selection, the second button. Okay. All right, so let's go back to our cube. So I'm going to go back to home view. I want to work with my cube, so I'm going to drag it over here. I want to get rid of, let's say I want to get rid of my cylinder. I'm going to delete it. By the way, if I'm working like here and I really want to work on my cube, but my sphere is kind of in my way, I can hide that sphere. I can keep it in the model, but I can hide it. So if I tap on it, I can look at the options for it, which are that. But if I tap on this little light bulb right here, it'll hide it for me. So I can work with the cube without that being in my way. And then when I'm done and I want it to all come back, I can tap this light bulb up here to show all of the objects. Okay, that's just a little side note. All right, so let's say I want to work with this. So I already showed you that you can size things by dragging these little squares. But let's say I'm having trouble getting exactly to the measurement I want, and I'm doing two things at once. I'm going to close that back up. So let's say I want this to be 60, and it's just kind of hard for me to get it exactly there. So what I can do is tap on the square, and then tap on this number, And then I can actually type in the measurement that I want it to be. So let's say I want it to be 60, and then tap OK. And that will set it to that, and then that measurement. And then if I wanted to, say, change this one to 45, same thing, I can tap on it, delete, and 45. I don't need the .00. If you wanted to have less than a millimeter, you can do that. And then I'm going to tap on this one to change the height. Okay. If I wanted to change further properties of this object, I can go over here, and there are some more options. Like the radius changes the curve of the corners, and you notice like it's moving by some unit that's kind of strange. It's in the hundreds of millimeters or whatever the unit is, maybe degrees. But I can just tap here and change it to what I want it to be as well. I don't have to worry about dragging and the precision involved in that. Okay, so that takes care of sizing. Now, I'm going to show you some things that students often have trouble with. So I'm going to get rid of my sphere here. And let's say I'm working with, I'm going to make this a little smaller. Let's say I'm working with this object, and I want to make a copy of it, and I want it to be a certain distance from my other object. So there are different ways I can make copies. If I tap on it, you see there's some buttons come up here. This is copy, and then that's paste. If I do copy and paste, it will, I'll just show you, it'll do that and then that. So it makes another one slightly offset so I can grab it, okay? And that's useful sometimes. But if I want it to be specifically spaced from the original place, I want to actually do duplicate. So if I tap on it, this other button right here beside the trash can is the duplicate button. So when I press duplicate, it made a copy and it's exactly on top of it. It's perfectly aligned. So then if I start dragging it, you're going to see these numbers appear. So this 18 is how far I've moved it from the original position to the right. So see, if I move it further, it goes up and up and up. This 2 down here is how much I've moved it down or up. Okay, so it's measuring from that original location. So if I go back to 0, it's perfectly aligned. If I start moving it, it goes off. I can use that to space things out, but you have to realize this is counting from this side to this side. So now they are 19 apart. If I were to undo that, I can get it, let's say I wanted it to be, from the original position, I wanted it to be 35 millimeters. I can drag it, or I can type here 35. And it's still not aligned, because if you notice it was 1 over here, so I kind of need to move it up 1, but it's kind of too late because I already lost it. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to undo it again. So if I wanted it to be perfectly aligned, I can move this one to 35 and change this one to 0 in order to get it aligned in that axis. So now I have them exactly 35 millimeters from the starting point, and they're perfectly aligned in this direction. Okay, well, let's say I needed to align it and I had already dropped it, and I don't remember what that number, that offset was. There's a way to align things, and you're going to use this tool a lot. So what I want to do, if I want to be aligned along this line down here, I'm going to click on the first item and then the second item, and you notice some new buttons have appeared. Okay, we're going to get to all of these, but right now we're talking about align, which is this button right here. So if I tap on that button, you'll see these little circular tabs come up. And these circular tabs are saying aligning on that line. So if I wanted it to be aligned at the top, I could tap this one and it would align it. If I wanted it to be aligned in the center, I could tap that one, which you'll notice they turn gray. They all turn gray when I do that because these are the same size. So they're already aligned at the top, the center, and the bottom when I align one of them. I can also, if I needed to go back to them being perfectly aligned, I could tap on these two corners. So that would be aligned there, which I already did. And I could align it here, which would go back to the original. And it's going to be more apparent when you're aligning objects that are not the same. So let's say I wanted to get this cylinder in here. And let's say I wanted this to be exactly in the middle of my rectangle here. So I could tap the two. So I tap one and then I tap the other. And then I tap the align button. Now I can align them in their centers. Keep missing the button. Okay. I could align them at the corners if I wanted, or the sides. You'll also notice there's one in the other dimension, the Z dimension. I could align them this way as well, depending on what I want to do there. And it's getting kind of hard to get to that button. There we go. So now they're aligned in all three axes by their centers. Okay. So let's talk about grouping. So you notice when I have two things selected, I have a couple of buttons. First of all, I guess let's do flipping first because that's not going to be as needed. But let's say this is not as easy to see with this object. So let's get a different object. Let's say a triangle. Okay. So let's say I want to take this object and I want to turn it over. I could do the same rotation thing that we did here, okay? But a faster way to turn it over or flip it around is to use the flip button, which is this, okay? So when I select one thing or multiple things, I can tap the flip button. And when I do, three arrows appear along different planes. So I could flip it that way, which wouldn't really make a difference. But if I flip it upside down, which is this one, you'll see I did that. I just rotated it 180 degrees without a lot of work, okay? I can also rotate it that way, which didn't make a difference, or that way, which didn't make a difference. And I can also flip it back by doing that. So this is the flip button. This is the align button. Now let's talk about group and separate. Okay. So let me delete some of these things because we're getting crowded here. So I want to, let's focus on this, zoom out a little bit. Okay, so I can make these two things one object by tapping on the two of them and then tapping on the group button, okay? Now notice, and a lot of students have this problem too. Let's say I'm thinking I want to group these two things and I tap on it. Notice my group button is gray. My group button is gray because I only selected one thing. I cannot make a group of one thing. I need to have more than one thing. So if I tap on the red now, then my group button appears and it disappeared because now I have one thing. So now this is one object, it moves as one thing. But there's another important thing that you're going to need to know how to do with grouping. So let's say I made a mistake and I don't really, like I didn't position it correctly, or I need to change something. Like I notice, oops, this cylinder is an oval and it's not perfectly round. So I have a couple options. If I just want to keep them grouped and I want to change one, I think I can double tap, yes, on one. And I can change the one. And when you have this like kind of pink square down here, that means I'm kind of working within a group. So I want this to be a perfectly round thing. So I'm going to change these numbers, these radiuses, these diameters to be the same. So let's say 8 by 8. And notice that cylinders actually come in with sides. If I go here, I can increase that number of sides all the way to the maximum, and it looks pretty round. By the way, when I tapped off of it, I deselected and they grouped back together. So now they're one thing again. I can double tap on it and move the object within the group, and then when I let go, they're again grouped together. Okay. Let's undo that. Okay. But I want to show you something that's going to be really useful to you. And I want to undo that. I want to tap off of it. It looks like it became ungrouped. So anyway, I'm going to pretend it's regrouped. Okay, so what you're going to want to do sometimes is not work with actual solid objects. You want to cut through objects. This is going to be a skill you're going to use a lot. So let's say I wanted actually through this, I wanted a hole to go through this rectangle. So I'm going to separate these just for that purpose. So instead of having a solid rectangle, I want basically a hole, this shape, through here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap on this object and I'm going to make it a hole. This little diagonal line here means make it a hole. So notice it became kind of transparent. And let's say I want it to go exactly through the center. So I can tap on my hole, tap on this thing, this rectangle. I'm going to align them in the center again. Now, I still have both of them selected and I've centered them. Now, when I hit group, when I group a hole and a solid, it cuts through them. It cuts through. It's like a joining of the two. So that is how you make a hole through an object. I can also cut off edges if I don't want it to be, like if I just didn't want it. Let me think of a good shape. I can cut off edges. So let's zoom out a little bit here. And this one I'm going to rotate 90 degrees and maybe 45 degrees. Okay. I'm going to put this, I'm going to put the red one back. No, I'm not actually. I'm going to align these to the center vertically. Okay, so now they're vertically aligned by the center. I'm going to take this one and intersect it with that one. Okay, I'm going to make this a hole. And now when I group them, I have now cut that shape into the corner there. All right, so it doesn't have to go all the way through the center or through it. It can also just cut off pieces to make the shape that you end up wanting. If I found that I made that cut wrong, of course, I can still do the same thing where I tap twice. I could change the size of it and let go. And then I still have a new cut. Okay. So these are still always going to be able to be changed unless you imported an object. Okay, so what you're going to need to do when you're done, by the way, this saves automatically, but you'll notice that this name up here is kind of weird. So this is just an automatically generated name, and looking at it, you have no idea what it is that you made. So it's always a good idea here to name it. And for what we're going to be doing you're probably just going to want to name it like the assignment number, like assignment 1 or assignment 2. If you are working with a partner, then you can use your name and your partner's name, or whatever. Or you can name it whatever it is, depending on what it is we're doing. But for in general, what we're going to be doing for the distance learning is naming it the assignment number. And then what you're going to do is tap on the logo here to go back. That does the saving process, but it saves automatically. So I have my work here still. Okay. All right, I think that is a great orientation into the app.